artists, and welcome to day 79 of the epic journey. I'm DaleneFM, and today I'm going to be painting with a palette knife. I'm going to be doing this little image of Midmar Dam. There's a bit of a backstory behind this image. I have a very, very dear friend. Her name is Tracy Zettler. You can look her up on Facebook. Her name is spelled Traceyzettler. And Tracy is an incredible photographer. And we went to Midmar Dam for a weekend long ago when we were still single. It was probably about 10 years ago now. And I woke up one morning, popped my head out of the tent to find Tracy sitting on the edge of the water taking pictures of the dam. And she gave me this image because I just absolutely fell in love with it. And this is now the second time I've painted it. I've got a large painting in my art room of the same image. I just think it's beautiful. She's really very good. Go and look her up. But yeah, back to the painting. I've decided to paint Midmar Dam because I had originally decided to do a seascape, but I think I like this one better because I was there. It was part of me in a lot of ways. I started off drawing a line across my canvas, just the water line, so that I had a line to which I must paint the sky and trees. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't paint too low down. And at this stage, I'm dabbing on the colors of the sky, that sort of dirty bluey color. There's French ultramarine and a lot of white with a little bit of burnt umber in there. The darker parts of the clouds have just got a little bit more French ultramarine and burnt umber in it, just to make it a little bit more darker. They were sort of grayish clouds. And there's a little bit of line of clouds that was more blue, so that's just got a little bit more French ultramarine in. Now I'm going to slow down the footage a little bit here so you can see what I'm doing. I put the paint on like as if I'm spreading butter, and then I go in and wiggle it into all the little nooks and crannies. The sky was done very much in the same way. You kind of load the palette knife quite a bit. You want to make sure that there's quite a lot of paint on the canvas, and then I just sort of slightly blend the edges of the trees into the sky as I'm going along there. And you do this throughout, even with those little bits of orange that I put in the sky. I'd wipe it on with the palette knife and then go back and just sort of slightly blend it, wiggling the palette knife backwards and forth until I get a not so hard edge. Now the waterline area that I'm working on now is a little bit difficult to achieve because I needed it to look quite misty. So you'll see I'll come back to it a little bit later on. The trees are relatively easy. It's just dabbing little blobs, blob, blob, blob as I go along and get the shape of the tree. At this stage I'm just putting in the basics of the tree. I will come back later and sort of redefine the edges of them as I become more confident about the shape that I'm wanting to create. Now this painting took about 2 hours. When I edited the footage in real time, it was about a 2-hour long video. I suppose I was sitting at the canvas for about 3 hours all in total, because I've edited out all the little in-between bits. So, you know, it's quick. Palette knife work is really, really quick. So now I'm starting to put the water in now. Quite a lot more grey in there, so there's a lot more burnt umber and white. Tiny little bit of French ultramarine just to give it a little bit of a bluish edge. And I'm just getting the edge of the waterline in there where it sort of meets the mist. You'll see I come back to the waterline of the trees and water every now and again. I come back there quite frequently because I'm trying to ensure that that's misty. I don't want it to be a hard line at all. And I start getting the basic colors down. Go back up to the sky to whiten it a little bit because I felt that it was just a little bit too blue, a little bit too dark. So I just went back up there a little bit. And there I am back at the waterline again, trying to get that misty effect going. And I feel at that point that I'd come pretty close to it. I was getting more confident with that water's edge at that stage. Now I'm starting to put down the colors in the water that are going to become the reflections of the trees. Now the water is actually quite easy in the sense that, you know, water's got all these horizontal ripples, so the horizontal work of the palette knife really suited those ripples quite nicely. It kind of naturally became a watery look. So initially I'm just spreading it on like butter on bread. Suppose this would be equivalent to color blocking on a brushwork, just putting in the basic colors for the moment. Now I suppose contrary to what you might feel, it actually works quite well to put down a color first and then come back and work on top of it, because when you're working with a palette knife you can smear color over on top of other colors without really doing too much in the way of mixing, and you get that sort of mixed edge where it's slightly blurred, which works quite nicely as well. You see I'm lining up the reflections of the clouds in the water with the clouds in the sky, because they need to line up, make sure that they are perpendicular to the reflections that are in the, make sure that the reflections are perpendicular to the color that's appearing in the sky. Now with the sped up footage it sort of looks like I'm scribbling, and I suppose in a way I am, but it's a little bit slower and a little bit more thought that has gone into it than what it might appear in the sped up footage, which is why I showed little bits of slowed down footage so you could see how careful I am. A little bit later on in the video I'll slow it down again when I'm doing the foliage so you can see how the palette knife is being used in that particular area. But in this area you can see I have the palette knife horizontal, I dab the colors down, and then I turn it vertical and I use the point to just smear horizontally, carefully, so that I can get those colors to sort of run into one another to create the reflection on the water. Every now and again you'll see I'll scrape a little bit of paint off. It's where I think I've maybe put a little bit too much, and a little bit of a scrape will help me to create the horizontality of the ripples in the water. So the scrape kind of works quite nicely there. For those of you who might want to see this video in real time, it's a 2-hour long video and can be a little bit like literally watching paint dry. I will put it on YouTube, not in the Epic Journey playlist. I'll just put it separate, so that if you do want to go and watch the whole thing in real time to get a real good sense of the way that I'm using the palette knife, then you may certainly do so. Just be aware that it is a 2-hour long video, and of course you can skip through it. You don't have to sit and laboriously watch the whole painting. Now what I'm doing with the palette knife in the trees, I will slow down further along to show you what I'm doing, but I'm actually using the palette knife that's got the blunt rounded tip, and I'm rounding the palette knife onto the canvas to create the little twigs in the top of those trees. Now a lot of the palette knife work is just dabbing it, just putting it flat onto the canvas, loading the back of the palette knife with the paint, and then just placing it onto the canvas. And now I'm just breaking it up a little bit to create the horizontal marks of the reflections. Now in the middle of the dam there were some drowned trees, as you can see, the stunning, beautiful sentinel trees. But there was also quite a lot of what I'm doing at the moment, these little sticks and twigs that were sticking out of the water. There was actually a little bit of a submerged island there, I guess, that when the dam is low, those trees are alive, or they were at one point at least. And what I'm doing now is actually quite challenging, to get all these little fine lines without really smearing too much. So what I'm doing with that palette knife there is just rolling it across the canvas, because it's got a blunt edge, so I can just roll it across the canvas, having loaded the very tip of the blade of the palette knife with paint. That palette knife with a blunt tip is also quite nice in that I could get some of those branches to be a little bit curved by just slightly leaning the palette knife at a bit of an angle and rolling it across at a bit of an angle. And naturally the line that it creates would be a slightly arced or curved line, as opposed to if I'd held it up straight, which I did on occasions, held it up straight and rolled it across the canvas, would have given me a straight line. I'm getting to the point in the painting now where I'm starting to get quite a bit of detail in. I'm starting to get some of the white highlights on the water in, and some of the more orange reflections in the sky. I come back and add a little bit more detail to that. I decided that the clouds needed to be a little darker. The reflection of the clouds on the water is actually quite a little bit darker than what they are in the sky. If you saw what I did there, I placed the colour on the bottom right hand corner of the canvas, then decided I'd done far too much, so I went and scraped it off and placed it again. So you can actually do that. You can go and scrape off. It was in an area where it wasn't going to damage anything else, so it was relatively simple for me to do so. Now the foliage that I'm doing in the corner here is taking a little bit more effort again, rolling the blunt palette knife across the canvas again to get those little archy curves, or using the straight palette knife to get the reeds, the straight up and down reeds or bulrushes, whatever you want to call them. Now in the original photograph there was actually a lot more of this foliage, but I reduced it a little bit. I didn't want it to overpower the canvas too much. Now the green that I'm using there is actually moss green and Van Dyke brown mixed together to make a very, very dark green. But the green of the foreground, what I'm doing now, all that foliage, has actually got a little bit of French ultramarine in it as well. I wanted it to be a lot darker, a lot more blue than the green in the background. So I've taken the same color of green and just added some French ultramarine to it. Now there I'm showing you a little bit of slowed down footage of me curving the blade and rolling it across the canvas. Now I was just dipping it straight down into a blob of paint that's on my palette, so that the front of the blade is actually coated with paint rather than the sides of the blade, and then just roll it gently across the canvas to place these little thin foliage curved lines of leaves and reeds. And there I'm showing you the side of the straight palette to get some of the longer straighter that aren't so curved. Again, same thing, I just dab the side of the palette knife into the blob of paint so that it actually coats the sides more than the flat part of the blade. And now I'm just putting some finishing touches, standing back, having a look, deciding where it needs more work. I decided it needed more white there, even though that's not really in the photograph. I thought it would be good, it would make a better painting to slightly lighten up the water in that area. Again, just doing some more touch-ups on the reflections. Felt that they needed more work. They weren't quite dark enough, or more defined, should I say. They weren't quite defined enough. And now I come back to fill in some of the trees a little, just to finish them off and correct some of their shapes that weren't quite to my liking. And that is it. That is the finished painting. 2 hours of great fun. Well, artists, I hope that you've enjoyed this palette knife painting together with the tutorial that we did yesterday, and I hope that you've learned a lot more about how to use your palette knife and the things that you can do, how very versatile a palette knife can be. It is really, really great fun, and I suppose it's really good that we've looked at this right after looking at Impressionism, because it can become a tool that is a very valuable one for doing impressionistic type work. So thank you so much again for joining me for this palette knife tutorial. I hope that you will like and share and spread it around the internet, and don't forget to go to the YouTube channel and catch up on any of the videos that you may have missed. I'd also like to encourage you to send me messages on Facebook, what you think of the videos, send me some of your artworks, anything that I can help you with, or just to share it on this page. It'll be great for us to see what other artists are doing around us. So have a great Wednesday, and I will see you again tomorrow in day 80. Thanks again. Bye. That's what you want to do.